Colorado Territory. 1872. The sun beat down hard on the red dirt streets of Leadville, and the sound of a gavel cracked through the thick, dry air like a shot. Next up, one woman, age 22, and her child boy, 18 months. Healthy, strong, no debts. Who'll start the bidding? Jaren Steele pulled his horse reins tighter, his jaw locking as he watched the woman step forward with her baby in her arms. Her dress was worn thin, her shoulders square despite the heat, and her eyes wide brown and filled with quiet fire scanned the crowd like she was counting every escape route. She held her son close, one hand on his back, the boy's curls stuck to her neck with sweat. Name's Wilhelmina, the auctioneer said. Goes by Willa. The boy's name is Finn. Whole package. Startin' at $20. Jaren swung down from his saddle, boots hitting the ground with a thud. He had come into town for feed, not this. But the second he saw her, something in him moved, something he had not felt in years. Not since the war, not since his brother died in his arms, and he swore he would never get close to anything that could be taken from him again. But this woman was not something. She was someone, and she was not meant to be owned. 50, Jaren said, loud and clear. Heads turned. The crowd murmured, surprised. The auctioneer blinked. Do I hear 55? Silence. Jaren stepped forward, his voice low and firm. You heard me. 50. In cash. Right now. No other bids? The auctioneer asked, scanning the crowd. Nothing. Sold. Willa flinched at the word. Jaren saw her shoulders tighten, her fingers curl around the baby even tighter. I am not yours, she said quietly, her voice low and steady. Jaren looked her in the eyes. No, ma'am. You are free. He dug into his coat pocket, handed over $50 in worn bills, and turned to her. Name's Jaren Steele, he said. I do not want anything from you. Just figured someone ought to put an end to that madness. She stared at him, her chin lifting. You just spent your money on a stranger. Jaren shrugged. Figure if a man's got money and no use for it but grain and whiskey, maybe it is time he used it for something better. Finn reached for Jaren with a chubby hand, surprising them both. The boy babbled nonsense, his fingers closing around Jaren's coat like he had already decided something. Willa hesitated, then nodded once. All right, but I do not need saving. Good, Jaren said. I am not in the business of saving. Just doing what is right. They stood there a moment longer, the sounds of the street falling away. Jaren watched her, the way she squared her jaw, the way her shoulders trembled just once before going still again. She was not weak. She was not lost. She had been dragged into something cruel, and she had stood through it without breaking. I got a place, Jaren said. Cabin about 10 miles north. Quiet. If you need somewhere safe for a few days, you and the boy are welcome. She eyed him. You live alone? Yes. You do not expect anything from me? Nothing. She looked down at Finn, then back at Jaren. Then we will come. Just for a few days. Jaren nodded. That is fine. He helped her onto the horse, careful not to touch her unless she allowed it. Finn settled in her lap, and they rode out of Leadville as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. The trail to Jaren's cabin was quiet, winding through pine and aspen, the air cooler the higher they climbed. Willa said little, but Jaren noticed the way she never looked away from the trees for long. She was watching, measuring, planning. The cabin sat on a ridge, tucked into a grove. Nothing fancy, just timber, stone, and hard work. Jaren opened the door and stepped back. You can have the bed, he said. I will take the floor. She looked at him then, really looked. You do not even know me. No, he said, but I know what it is like to have nowhere to go. You and your boy are safe here. She carried Finn inside, and when the door shut behind her, Jaren felt something shift in his chest. That night, he sat by the fire while she fed Finn in silence. The boy's eyes drooped, and Willa's hand moved gently over his back, rubbing slow circles until he slept. He has not known peace, she said after a long while, her voice barely above a whisper. Jaren looked up. He will now. Willa exhaled, the sound catching. His father sold us. Said he could not carry the weight anymore. Said we were better off with someone else. Jaren's hands went still around his mug. You are not what he said. And you are not something to be sold. She looked at him then, and the firelight caught the shimmer in her eyes. You do not even know me. No, he said. But I want to. Willa said nothing, just nodded once and turned back to Finn. But something had changed in the room, something quiet but strong, like a seed waking beneath the earth. Over the next few days, Willa swept the cabin, cooked simple meals, and let Finn toddle in the yard while Jaren chopped wood. She did not say much, but Jaren felt her watching him. Not with suspicion anymore, but with curiosity. Maybe even trust. One morning, he found her standing on the porch, Finn asleep in her arms. You built this place yourself? She asked. Yes. She nodded. It is good. Solid. He looked at her. So are you. She blinked, then looked away, but her lips curved just a little. On the 5th morning, she stood in the doorway while he saddled his horse. You going into town? She asked. Just for supplies. She hesitated. We will be here when you get back. Jaren looked at her, felt something crack open in his chest. I hope so, he said. As he rode down the ridge, he realized something simple and terrifying. He had freed her and her baby at that auction. And somewhere along the way, without even trying, he had fallen in love with her. The pot of beans simmered low on the hearth when Jaren returned, saddle creaking beneath him, the scent of pine clinging to his coat. He ducked under the lintel, arms full of flour, lard, and a length of cotton cloth folded neat. Willa stood by the table, her hands dusted with meal, pressing dough into tin molds for biscuits. Her blouse sleeves were rolled and her hair had come loose from its pin, curling at her temples. She didn't look up right away. There's a fox been sniffing near the coop, she said, flattening the dough with the heel of her hand. I saw tracks this morning. Small. Probably young. Jaren set the bundle down on the dry sink. I'll set a snare tonight. Don't want it growing bold. She finally turned, wiping her palms on her apron. You were gone longer than I expected. They had a shipment come in late. Took time to sort through it. I brought coffee. And a tin of peaches. Her brow lifted just slightly, surprised. Peaches? Figured you might miss the taste of something sweet. Willa moved past him, untying her apron as she went. Finn was asleep in the corner crib, one arm thrown above his head, lips parted. She leaned down, adjusted the quilt over his legs, then straightened. You don't have to keep feeding us, she said, quiet but sure. We'll find a way to earn our keep. I wasn't counting your costs, Jaren said. Never will. She turned back to him, and for a long moment neither spoke. The wind shifted outside, brushing the cabin walls like a whisper. I've been thinking on work, she said finally. Not just chores here. I can mend, wash, take in sewing. If there's families nearby, maybe some of the women need help. There's a widow down the valley keeps a household with 2 children, Jaren said. Her husband drowned crossing the Arkansas last spring. She might welcome the help. I'd like to ride down there. Ask her myself. That'd be all right. Willa glanced toward the window where late light filtered through the trees. Would you mind staying with Finn? While I go? Jaren nodded once. Of course. She looked at him then in a way she hadn't before, not wary, not guarded, but thoughtful. Like she was weighing something not in words but in feeling. I won't be long, she said. He watched her saddle his smaller mule, her shoulders steady, movements practiced. She didn't ask for help, didn't hesitate. She mounted and rode down the trail without a backward glance, dust lifting beneath the hooves. Inside, Finn stirred. Jaren lifted him gently, settling into the rocker by the hearth. The boy's head lolled against his shoulder, warm and heavy. You've got your mother's eyes, he murmured. Hold the world in M like it don't scare you. Finn sucked his thumb, cheek against Jaren's collar. Outside, the sun fell golden on the ridge. And Jaren rocked slow, the boy breathing even against him, the fire low and crackling. Willa returned before dusk, cheeks ruddy from wind, her shawl drawn tight. She stepped inside and paused, taking in the sight of Jaren and Finn curled together in the rocker. Her fingers loosened their grip on the doorframe. She needs help washing and mending linens, she said softly. Offered me $2 a week and eggs besides. Sounds fair. I start tomorrow. Jaren eased Finn into the crib, tucking the quilt firm. Willa was watching, her face unreadable. "You two did all right?" she asked. "He missed you some, but we managed." She stepped forward, close enough for him to catch the scent of saddle leather and wind in her hair. "You're good with him." "I never had much chance to be," Jaren said. "But it comes easy with him." Her gaze held his and something shifted again just slightly. Like a door left ajar. "I didn't expect to feel settled," she said low. "Not this soon. Not here." "You don't have to rush it," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." She reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. "Just once." Then she turned and busied herself by the stove. But Jaren stood still a long moment, watching the place her hand had touched. That night, the wind picked up, rattling branches against the shutters. Jaren added wood to the fire and found Willa sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "I keep thinking it'll catch up to me," she said without looking up. "The way we were taken. The way he walked off and never turned back." Jaren sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "It might," he said. "But you're not the same woman you were then. And you've got ground beneath your feet now." She drew in a slow breath. "I'm trying to believe that." "Believe it," he said. "You've made this place warmer just by being in it." She lifted her eyes, and this time the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full. "I don't know where this leads," she said. "Neither do I. But I want to find out." Jaren reached for her hand. Not pressing, not pulling, just offering. Her fingers curled into his, and her shoulders eased. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, the fire burned steady. And for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. The first snow came soft and early, laying a thin crust over the high meadow while the aspen clung to their last gold leaves. Jaren stepped outside before dawn, breath fogging, and found Willa already at the woodpile, her skirt hem dark with frost. She was splitting kindling with careful rhythm, not rushing. He didn't speak until she turned and saw him, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "You didn't need to be out here," he said, pulling his coat tighter. "I couldn't sleep," she answered. "I've always worked better with my hands when my mind's restless." He took them all from her and finished the last few lengths without asking. She didn't protest, only stood beside him, arms folded, watching the sky lighten to a pale silver. Inside, Finn stirred in his crib. Willa tucked the wool blanket higher over his back, then lit the lamp and warmed milk on the stove. Jaren poured coffee and leaned against the table, his hands wrapped around the tin cup. "Have you thought about staying on through winter?" he asked without looking at her. She turned from the stove slowly. "I have. And I've never survived one this far north. Don't know what to expect." "You won't be alone in it." Willa nodded, then set the kettle down and crossed to the table. "I know that. Still feels like I'm waiting for something to be taken from me." Jaren didn't answer right away. He looked at her hands, calloused, strong, a faint red mark just under her thumb from where she'd burned herself baking the day before. "I don't want you waiting," he said. "Not for the next bad thing. I want you to be able to build something here if that's what you want." Her eyes didn't leave his. "I think I might want that, but I've never had anything last long enough to believe in it." Jaren reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded square of cotton, the cloth he'd bought in town. He laid it on the table between them. "For a new dress," he said. "One you choose the shape of." She touched the fabric, smoothing it once, then drew her hand back. "You think that's what I need?" "No," he said. "But I thought you might like to have something that's only yours." She didn't answer for a long time. Then, quietly, "My mother used to say a woman's allowed one soft thing for herself. Just one. Then she's got to go back to being useful." Jaren shook his head. "You're useful just by being here." Outside, the wind lifted and shook the shutters. Willa folded the cloth and set it aside. "You said once you'd lost someone," she said. "Your brother." He nodded. "Samuel. 3 years younger. We enlisted together. He didn't make it out of Chickamauga." She pulled out the chair across from him. "And Saturday, was he like you?" Jaren smiled without humor. "No. He was better. He liked music, had a fiddle he carried with him even into camp. He'd make up songs about everything: bad food, worse weather. He could make people laugh even when the world was falling apart. And you. I kept us fed. I kept us alive." At least until I didn't. Willa reached across the table and laid her hand over his. It was the first time she'd touched him with intention. You did what you could. He closed his fingers around hers. I've been trying to figure out how to live with peace ever since. Finn's small footsteps padded across the floor as he woke, rubbing his eyes. Willa stood and lifted him into her arms. He settled against her shoulder, thumb in his mouth. I think we're figuring it out, she said. That afternoon, Jaren hitched the mule to the sled and brought down the last of the firewood from the ridge trail. Willa was outside when he returned, hanging herbs to dry under the eaves. She'd cut her old skirt into strips and was tying them into a braided rug by the cabin door. Finn sat nearby with a pile of pine cones, stacking them like stones. Jaren watched her for a moment before stepping down from the sled. There's a family west of here, he said. A German couple. They raise goats. The man broke his leg last week. I said I'd check in on them. She looked up. They need help. Likely. I was thinking we could all go. Stay the night, maybe 2. Bring bread. They've got a daughter about Finn's age. Willa nodded slowly. We can do that. I know it's a small thing, he said. But it's something. Being part of the land around you. Knowing your neighbors. She met his eyes. I want to belong somewhere. Not just pass through. Jaren stepped closer. Then stay. Not just for the winter. Not just until it's safe. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and held her there, feeling her breath even out, her body no longer braced like it was waiting for a blow. Inside the cabin that night, the lamp burned low and steady. Willa sat by the fire, Finn asleep against her side, one hand curled in her skirts. Jaren carved quietly at the table's small notches along a piece of pine, shaping it into a pull toy for the boy. Willa watched him, her voice soft. I never thought I'd find love again. Not after what I came from. Jaren didn't look up. Neither did I. But I see it now, every day. In the way you look at him. In the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. He set the carving knife down. I don't want you to ever question what's here. Not with me. She reached over, took his hand, and held it firm. I don't, she said. Not anymore. No more words passed between them. They didn't need to. The fire warmed the walls, and the snow whispered down outside, slow and sure, covering the trail behind them. By mid-December, the wind came sharp off the peaks and the snow deepened along the timberline. The sled trail to the valley had narrowed beneath drifts, but Jaren kept it packed with regular passes, hauling feed and supplies to the goat-sick family, now nearly back on their feet. Willa had taken to mending their winter garments, patching worn sleeves and reinforcing seams while Finn played at her feet with a carved horse and a length of twine. Inside the cabin, things had shifted almost without notice. Her sewing basket had found a place beside the hearth. A second mug sat out each morning. Jaren had built a cradle of pine slats for Finn, low enough for Willa to reach from the bed. There had been no talk of what they were building, but the truth of it was stitched into every quiet gesture, every shared task. One evening, after supper, Willa stood brushing her hair by the narrow window. Moonlight silvered the strands, and her reflection moved faint in the glass. Did you always live like this? She asked, not turning. Jaren set aside the ledger he'd been updating. Like what? This much space. This much silence. He leaned back in his chair. I tried town living once. Set up a smithy in Cannon City for a winter. Too many doors banging open, too many folks wanting something from you before you've had your coffee. She smiled faintly. I think I'd have liked the noise once. When I was younger. Maybe even craved it. You don't now. No, she set the brush down. Now I want a roof that holds, and mornings where I can hear my son breathing before the birds start. Jaren crossed the room and stood beside her. Outside, the trees were heavy with snow, branches bowed under the weight. I've been thinking, he said. Come spring, there's land east of the ridge. Rich soil, good sun. I could start planting oats. Maybe pasture 2 more mules. She studied the dark sweep of the trees. And what would you want with more land? To fill it right, he said. With a family. With purpose. She turned to him then, her eyes steady. You're saying that for me? I'm saying it because of you. He reached for her hand and she let him take it, their fingers cold but firm. She didn't pull away when he leaned down, just tilted her face up as if she'd been waiting. The kiss was quiet, with nothing hurried in it, no hunger, only the slow certainty of something that had taken its time and come true. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest. I never thought I'd feel safe like this, she said. I never thought I'd want to share my life again, he answered. She looked up. But you do. With you I do. They stood like that until Finn stirred in the cradle. Willa moved to lift him, but Jaren was already there, cradling the boy with a sure hand. Finn settled against his shoulder with a sigh. Tomorrow, Willa said, watching them, I want to walk the boundary where the new fence might go. If we're going to plant oats, we'll need to keep the mule deer out. Jaren grinned, one hand on Finn's back. I'll bring the stakes. The next morning they set out early, walking the edge of the eastern slope. Willa pointed out where the snow melted quickest, where the drainage would run come thaw. She paused at a flat spot near the rocks. This is where I'd build the hen coop, she said. If we're raising more than we can eat, they'll need room. Jaren crouched beside her, pressing a stake into the ground. You're already thinking about next winter. I'm not planning on going anywhere. He stood and offered her his arm. She took it and together they walked the rest of the line, slow and steady. That afternoon, Willa brought out a length of muslin she'd been saving. She laid it across the table and began cutting it for a new dress, her hands sure, movements clean. Jaren watched her from the door, his coat dusted with snow. You're making something fine, he said. She didn't look up. Not for Sunday, for every day. I want to live my life in something I made with my own hands. Jaren stepped inside and closed the door behind him. You already are, he said. That night, with the fire burning low and Finn asleep between them on a blanket pallet, Jaren reached for her hand again. I've got nothing to offer you but a roof, honest work, and what's left of my heart. She leaned into him, her voice soft against his shoulder. Then I've got everything I need. The thaw came slow. Snow turned to slush along the southern slope and the creek that ran behind the cabin began to hum under its ice, soft at first, then louder as the days stretched longer. Willa rose early each morning, checking the pantry, measuring out what remained of the flour and salt pork, fitting the last of the winter with careful hands. Finn toddled after her, steadier on his feet now, his coat patched at the elbows with cloth from Jaren's old shirt. Jaren had taken to mending the lean-to, reinforcing the beams with fresh-cut pine. His hands were raw from the work, but he moved with quiet purpose, measuring each board with precision. Willa watched him one afternoon, arms crossed, and said nothing until he stepped down from the ladder. You're making room, she said. For the wagon, he answered, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. Once the road clears, I'll need to fetch posts for the eastern fence line. She nodded. I've been saving seed. The woman over the ridge gave me rye and beans. Said we'd have to plant early if we want a strong yield. He set the hammer down and looked at her. You've already decided, then? I don't want this to be something I pass through, she said. I want this to be ours. Jaren stepped closer, his voice low. Then let's make it so. Not just with the land. With each other. Willa tilted her head. You're not asking. No, he said. I'm offering. She reached for his hand, rough and warm from the work. Then I'm saying yes. They married 2 weeks later, when the ground had softened just enough to take a stake. The widow down the valley came with her daughters, one of them carrying a basket of eggs wrapped in cloth. A preacher passing through on his way to Fort Garland stopped long enough to speak the words, and they stood in the clearing behind the cabin, with pine trees swaying and the sun just cresting the ridge. Willa wore a dress she'd sewn from the cotton Jaren had brought months before. The pattern simple, the stitching fine. Her hair was braided back, a sprig of dried wild mint tucked behind her ear. Finn clung to her skirt until Jaren lifted him onto his hip, holding him steady while the preacher read from his pocket Bible. When the vows were done, Willa didn't cry. but she held Jaren's hand like it was the last thing keeping her steady on the earth. He kissed her once, slow and sure, and when they turned to face the others, the younger of the widow's girls clapped her hands, cheeks pink with cold. They shared cornbread and dried apples by the fire that evening, the cabin warm with laughter and the scent of smoked meat. Finn fell asleep curled in a quilt near the hearth, his thumb tucked under his chin. After their guests left, Jaren banked the fire and turned to find Willa standing near the open door, watching the moon rise over the pines. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I was just thinking. I never pictured a day like this. Not for me." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Did it feel real?" She leaned back into him. "More than anything ever has." They stood there a long while, listening to the wind move low through the trees. Then she turned in his arms and kissed him again, slower this time, with nothing held back. By summer, the eastern field had broken into green. The rye grew tall and straight, the beans climbing their stakes with stubborn grace. Willa kept a garden beside the cabin, rows of onions and squash tucked between wild marigold. Jaren built a smokehouse from stone gathered near the creek, and Finn followed him from project to project, dragging a stick behind him like a plow. One afternoon, Willa found Jaren sitting on the porch with the boy asleep in his lap, a carved flute resting across his knee. "You made that?" she asked. Jaren nodded, not moving. Thought he might want something of his own. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "He will. He'll grow up with everything we didn't have." Jaren kissed the top of her head. "He'll grow up knowing he was wanted. That's more than most." When the harvest came, they worked side by side, stacking sheaves, filling sacks, and preserving what they could. The work was hard, but it was honest, and each evening they sat at the table with full plates and a boy who laughed more than he cried. In the quiet hours after the chores were done, they'd sit by the fire, her hand in his, the warmth between them not needing words. Their lives had been forged in hardship, but what they'd built now was something solid, something lasting. And when Willa turned to Jaren one night, her hand resting over his, and whispered, "There's another on the way," he didn't speak. He just pulled her close, his lips against her brow, a smile in his chest that would not fade. They stayed on that land all their days. Built more rooms as the years passed, planted more fields, raised their children with quiet strength. Finn grew tall with his mother's eyes and Jaren's steady hands. Nothing was ever easy, but it was theirs. And it held.